It says we are live from the Illinois area. We are doing our live stream tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Glad you are here. As always, if you can hear me and if you can see me, leave that down in the little chat area. That'd be pretty awesome. As you can see, this is Joanna at her best. She's turned herself into a whiteboard. She is here. She's off to the side. She will join us later. For those of you who would rather see her than the whiteboard, well, that's going to happen later. But at least for now, I kind of needed the space because we're going to be going over pH today. We are going to do this in a little bit, so don't worry. If we don't understand all this stuff just yet, the goal, hopefully, is by the time we're done with this, it's going to be awesome. You're going to understand it a lot more when it comes to aquarium pH. And so that is the goal here. And so some of you had asked in previous live streams, I've seen some comments, hey, can we do some kind of like a whiteboard thing, like almost like fish room class? And I'm like, I think we can do that. And so if we like this sort of thing, we'll do it every once in a while. If we decide, I didn't like that, I would rather just not have to be in school on a Wednesday night at 8 o'clock at night Central Standard Time, then of course we will do other things as well. So a few announcements before we get into this thing here. Thing number one, Joanna just came out with her video this morning on the small scape. That's her YouTube channel. And it's a cool video because she reviewed some lights that are really awesome for nano tanks. And I think it was a very useful thing. Her Saturday video, I had a little bit of fun editing that one. So that one will come out on her channel on Saturday. It's a short little video, pretty cool. And then of course we've got a video on Primetime Aquatics, this channel right here, coming out on Friday morning at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. Hopefully you will enjoy that as well. So one other thing, if you really like this subject, pH, and how it impacts your aquarium hobby, I've got a couple videos down in the description below if you want to watch those a little bit later. They're kind of condensed versions of what we're going to go over here tonight. So those are there for you as well. Thank you to everybody who's here. The moderators, Myrtle, and I saw Mary Page and Clint is here. Thank you so much for all the work that you do because this stream goes a lot better with people kind of keeping the chat and all that stuff under control and pointing out the questions and all that kind of thing. So thank you once again. All right. As you know, I'm a big fan of starting on time. But before we do, thank you very much, Daniel, for the super chat little sticker thing. That's pretty awesome. Joanna always loves those little sticker things. So that's a pretty cool thing. And that was her hand. So pH. Why are we talking about pH tonight? Well, there's a few reasons why. Obviously, pH is one of those water parameters we test as fish keepers from time to time, especially as newer fish keepers. pH can help us determine the types of fish that we're going to keep in our aquariums and the types of fish that are going to thrive in our aquariums. Thank you so much, Bonnie, for the super chat. Always appreciate you being here. Really appreciate your support. Thank you. So proper pH, it is going to help our fish thrive. It's going to reduce our stress, right? So when our fish are doing well, and they are thriving, we are enjoying the hobby a lot more. In some cases, a proper pH is going to be necessary for breeding. Not all fish, but in some cases, we need to match that pH a little bit closer to the fish's ideal range if we want to breed certain fish. The other thing that I want to point out before I get too deep in this, I don't want to make pH like this thing that we absolutely, positively have to match, or otherwise we're horrible fish keepers and all of our fish are going to live in agony. And so often when I talk about environmental parameters, whether that's in microbiology or biology, often living things, especially aquatic animals, have a pH range in which they will thrive in. It's not necessarily, well, you know what? In the wild, this particular fish likes a pH of 8.2, not 8.3, not 8.0, but 8.2. And if you're not keeping them at 8.2, you are a horrible human being. So I don't want to imply that that is the case. And so I want to state that right from the beginning, that there is a pH range that most fish will do well at. Some fish, that range can be a little bit larger. Some it's going to be a little bit more narrow. And so often it's more important for fish keepers to have a stable pH that's within that acceptable range than trying to hit some ideal pH right on the nose, but then doing it artificially. And then sometimes over time, what we see is some pH fluctuations that can actually cause more stress than if the pH was just stable over the long term. We should also understand that when we're keeping wild fish, the pH might be more important. So that range is going to narrow up quite a bit, especially if we're pulling fish directly out of one of the Great Lakes in Africa, or we're pulling them out of certain areas, especially in South America, and in that case, the pH can be very low. And so they might be a little bit more sensitive to changes in pH and changes in water hardness, which we're also going to talk about a little bit today, because in order to understand pH fully, we have to bring in the water hardness component just a little bit. The other thing to understand too is a lot of times we think, okay, you know what? If a certain fish is normally found in, let's say, South America, and in that particular area in which they're found, the pH is usually a 6.8. Then that is absolutely the pH that I want to keep in my aquarium, where in some cases, the fish that have been bred, especially at some of the places, and if they've been taken from the wild and then bred in the United States, sometimes those offspring are the ones that are surviving better at a pH that might be a little bit higher. And so we have to understand, I think of like maybe neons. And so often when breeders in the United States want neons to breed, especially the large breeders, I'm not talking about like basement breeders and people are breeding them in their tanks, but when you take something like a neon, yes, they will drop the pH to get the neons to breed. But then once they do, a lot of times those juveniles wind up in a grow out pond where the pH may be significantly higher. And then we think, okay, you know what? We've got to get them back here and then drop that pH down yet again. And so sometimes those changes in pH can cause a lot of stress. All right, so a couple things then. When it comes to the basics, all right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this table. And we've kind of gone over this before in a video a long time ago, but I just want to make sure that we understand what it is we're actually talking about. What I've done here, it should become very obvious to you that I am a master artist. And so I spent a lot of time here with this pH scale. And I think, let's just take a moment and look at that in awe. And so I have this pH scale here. And the pH scale goes from 0 all the way up to 14. And so that's what we're using to measure pH. And of course, a lot of you are aware of this because you measure pH in your aquariums. But I want to take it a little bit of a step further. And so a pH of 7 is what we would call neutral. That's pure water. Well, what does that actually mean? That's where this comes important right here. What a pH of 7 means is these little brackets here stand for the concentration of something. For those of you who are really on your chemistry game, you know that if we combine this hydrogen with this oxygen and this hydrogen, you'd have H2O. And so in pure water, the concentration of these hydrogen ions right here and these hydroxyl groups right here with the negative charge, they're equal. And so that's what happens at a pH of 7. Now, as the pH goes up, as the pH increases, we say that that solution is becoming more basic. So as we go to a 7, an 8, and 9, all the way up to 14, that solution is becoming more basic. The pH is going up. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean chemically? What's happening to our environment? What that means up here is it means that the concentration of hydrogen ions is going down while the concentration of these hydroxyl groups is going up. That's what that means when we say we have a high pH or that solution is basic. It just means this. That's all it means. Now, what's interesting, on the other side, a lot of people recognize that as we get further and further down the pH scale and we get more acidic, that can be dangerous, right? We see these movies about, oh my gosh, did you see the movie Alien where the alien, it gets cut and it's got acid for blood and it eats through the hull of the ship and they're all worried and, acid burns and all kinds of stuff like this. And so we tend to think that a pH that goes down can be dangerous. But guess what? A pH that gets too extreme on the upside, that can also be dangerous on the high side. In fact, one of the things that we talk about in one of my classes is there's actually a word that we use to describe when you have a solution with a very high pH that can be reactive. If you ever see a warning label on a bottle, on a solution, in a solution where it says caustic, that means that you're dealing with a solution that has a high pH, and that pH can be dangerous. And so that's what we have up here. Now down here we've got acidic. So that would be the term that you would see on a bottle, where if there is a solution that could potentially be dangerous because the pH is very low, that's acidic. What does that mean? It means the opposite of what it meant up here. So as we get lower and lower and lower on the pH scale, we see the concentration, right? That's the brackets again. The concentration of the hydrogen ions is going up relative to the concentration of these hydroxyl groups. That's going down. When that happens, we call that an acidic solution. And so that's what we're dealing with the pH scale. Now, here's the cool thing. This scale that you see here is what is known as logarithmic. So a logarithmic scale does not, a lot of times people think, okay, well, if I've gone from a pH of 7 up to a pH of 8, that's a change of 1. But with a logarithmic scale, that's not what that means. And that's why it becomes important for us to make sure that we have a stable pH, more so in some cases than an ideal pH. Because let's just say, as an example, and I'm going to have to try to write this sideways, which I don't like to do, but let's just say you start with a pH of 8. And that pH drops to 6. You're like, okay, well, pH of 8 to 6, it's two numbers. But that's not what we're saying here. Every time this number changes, it changes by a factor of 10. So we went from 8 to 7. That was a 10 times difference in the concentration of hydroxyl groups relative to the hydrogen ions. But we did it again to go from 7 to 6. And so that's actually 100 times difference in the pH. And so that can be a very drastic change. What's interesting is living things, especially multicellular living things like us, we have a buffering system inside of our bodies to prevent this massive change in pH. If it changes too drastically, that could cause serious harm to our bodies. And so just as a side note, I know this is a fish channel, but if you wanted to kind of relate this to us, when we eat something, it goes into our stomach. Our stomach is very acidic, at least while it's digesting food. But the first thing that has to happen is after that food gets digested in our stomach and it goes into the small intestine, all of that acid has to be neutralized, because really, besides the stomach and the female lower GU, the rest of the body is really close to neutral, right around a pH of 7.2. And so the rest of the body buffers the pH of its solution, whether that's the blood or the interstitial fluids or inside the cell, right around a pH of 7.2. If the pH goes up a little bit, that buffer brings it down a bit. If the pH goes down too much, that buffer brings it up. I like to think of a buffer as what it's doing is it's regulating pH within a certain range. Some buffers, like the ones we have in our body, they like to buffer things, regulate things, stabilize pH at right around a 7.2. But there are other buffers out there that will stabilize a pH at 4. There are buffers that will stabilize a pH at 9. And so these buffers, they are basically like a sponge. When the pH starts to get too low, like below 7.2, guess what they do? They start to take in, like a sponge, those hydrogen ions. If it gets too high, they will start to neutralize those hydroxyl groups. And so that's really the purpose of a buffer. Now, why does any of that actually matter? Because in an aquarium, if we're dealing with water, our buffer in many cases becomes this, our KH. And by the way, we did a video on water hardness. I will, if I remember after the live stream, I'll try to link that in the description below as well. But KH is really important. A lot of times when we say that we have a high pH, we say, okay, the environment is alkaline. But in some ways, we're misusing that word because alkalinity is a measure of how well a solution is buffered, not necessarily how high the pH is. Now, they're often linked because a higher pH is usually well buffered, and often there's going to be a higher KH there. So when we're measuring pH and KH, they in some ways kind of go hand in hand. And this has a lot of implications for us because often, not always, but often for fish tanks that have a higher pH, usually the KH is going to be a little bit higher. In aquariums and in water where the pH is lower, often that KH is going to be a little bit lower, that carbonate hardness. Why that matters is when we put certain things into our aquariums, it may have a larger effect if our KH is low. And in fact, I did a video a while back where I tried to talk, where we explained why driftwood doesn't always lower pH in an aquarium. And so a lot of times, because that's the next thing is like, well, I want to keep these fish. How do I increase the pH? How do I decrease the pH? If you have a high KH and your pH is a little bit higher, it's actually not easy, as some of you know, to lower the pH. Because your pH is well buffered, you can add, some people are like, yeah, you know what? If you've got a high pH, just throw some driftwood in there or some catopolese or a little bit of peat moss and you'll lower that pH. In some cases, yes, but if your pH is high and you have a high KH, chances are adding driftwood, catopolese, cholla wood, peat moss isn't going to give you the results that you want. At the same time, if your pH is right around a 7 and you have virtually no KH, if you add that driftwood or the peat moss or the cholla wood or catopolese, you could have a more noticeable effect on the pH of your aquarium. And so really where that confusion comes in is it's not just about the pH. Those things that I just mentioned to lower pH, so peat moss, driftwood, catopolese, cholla wood, all of those organics, that's not going to have an impact the higher your KH is. It's going to have less of an impact, I should say. For people who want to lower their pH, it becomes a little bit tricky because I am of the opinion the best way to lower pH is to use RO water. RO water doesn't have KH or GH in it. And so it has very little buffering capacity. And so then the next trick is, okay, if I'm using RO water, I remineralize it to a certain extent, and I put in the organics, maybe it's the peat moss, maybe it's a substrate, right? And so maybe you're using like a lava rock as a substrate, then yes, you're going to lower your pH because there's not a lot of buffering capacity there, but you really have to be careful because once again, you might lower that pH. But guess what else has an impact on the pH? Fish waste. And so the more waste your fish produce over time, the lower that pH is going to go if your water is not well buffered. And so we have to be very careful of that, right? We have to be careful that when we use water that has a very low KH and we're trying to lower the pH because we want to keep some fish, maybe wild caught fish like discus or Altum angels or some of the shrimp, right? The Caridina shrimp. We want to make sure that the pH is lower, but we also really need to make sure that it's stable. In my opinion, it's probably a little bit harder to lower pH than it is to increase it. Now, if we wanted to increase it, there are a number of ways that you could potentially do that. One, you could add something like aragonite. You could add something like crushed coral. Why? Because that's going to give you, the aragonite is going to give you a little bit more KH. It's going to gradually raise the pH. You could use something like the Carob Key. Carob Key? You got that? Carob C Cichlid mix. That's what I was trying to say. That will sometimes help, especially if your KH is a little bit on the lower side. But here's the funny thing. We put flagstone in our tanks. We use the Carob C Cichlid mix. We do all of those things. It has almost no impact whatsoever on our water parameters because for us, in our fish room, our water is already at a KH of around 10 to 12. It's already at a pH of between 8 and 8.2. So adding those things really isn't having much of an impact on our water. Where if we had water that was maybe 6.8 and 7 and maybe our KH was like 3 or 4, then that might do better in increasing the not only the carbonate hardness, but also it would increase our pH a little bit. So that is kind of like I guess a quick rundown. The other thing that you can do, especially if you're trying to increase your pH, is there are Cichlid salts out there. I know our channel sponsor, Fritz Aquatics, they have these Cichlid salts where it basically tells you right on the package, hey, add this much salt per this much volume of water and expect to see this change in pH. I always recommend, if you hear nothing else today, if you're thinking about adjusting the pH of an aquarium, don't do it in the aquarium first. Get yourself a tub, a plastic tub, and an air stone, and go ahead, take the readings of your water, and then go in and start making adjustments in that tub of water with nothing in there. Understand that once life is added in there, things are going to change, but at least you have a baseline. At least you know, okay, you know what? I have a pH of 7. I'd really like to see it go down. I'm going to put this piece of driftwood in here, and maybe I'm going to use a little bit of peat moss and a hang-on back filter, and let me go ahead and see in this volume of water what it's doing. Just like I think it was last week, we talked about one of the ways that you can actually raise the carbonate hardness is by adding baking soda. I would not just start dumping baking soda into a fish tank unless I knew what it was going to do, the amount of baking soda per volume. And so I would do that kind of stuff in a tote and see, okay, well, I added a teaspoon in a 30-gallon tote. Here's what it did. And I would monitor that for a few weeks to see, okay, what's happening? Am I getting fluctuations? Because again, if you are making changes to pH and they are not stable changes, that can be far more dangerous to your fish than trying to reach an ideal. And again, people ask us all the time. One of the critiques that we get, I guess it's a nice way to say it, and sometimes rather angry comments is, you'll look at maybe like our 150. And our 150 has the Geophagus altifrons, it's got the Severum, it had an angelfish in there for a while. And so then you see the Frontosa. And without fail, every time I show that tank, I get the nasty gram that says, you can't have those fish together, they require completely different water parameters. Now, I will say that you have to be careful of how you mix fish because for me, it's always about the diet. But when it comes to water parameters, we have between 70 and 80 fish tanks. All of them, every last one of them have roughly the same water parameters. They all come from the same source, our tap water, which again, 10 to 12 in the carbonate hardness and general hardness, pH of 8 to 8.2. I don't adjust the tanks. At some point in the future, if we want to get into breeding, like let's say a Pistols or German blue rams or some wild caught fish, will I set up maybe an RO unit? Quite possibly, but then that will be specialized for just a few tanks. But again, when it comes to pH, stable is often better than ideal. And all right, so that is a little bit, I guess, the general background when it comes to pH and what we do with it. Let's go ahead, let's take a look here at what we've got going on. I saw a bunch of super chats come in and stickers, so let me go ahead and kind of go through those. I think I have most of them, so let me kind of go through here. Arctic Dark, your volume is very low. So I'm not sure. By the way, thank you for the super chat. Why that is because my volume is as high as I can make it. And it's coming through at the same level as it normally does. So if anybody else is having a low volume thing, just let me know. But I don't know. Yeah, there's nothing else I can do about it. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Adam, thank you so much for the super chat. Biology, chemistry, and art tuition. Awesome. Very cool. Let's see here. Thank you so much, by the way. Yes, that was my art. I'm very proud of it. Yep. Thank you so much. What do we got here? Desert Fish for the super chat. Great topic tonight. The primetime professor is in. Much respect from Joshua Tree. Well, thank you. Appreciate you being here. Let's see what else we have here. Adam, welcome to the primetime community members. Glad you're here. Let's see what else do we have as we scroll down. Oh, almost. Wait a minute. I'm getting a little too crazy. Arctic Dark, thank you again for the super chat. Anybody ever hear of Borneo redfin silver sharks, aka redfin bala shark? I haven't been able to locate any for months. Any place that can ship for? I have not seen that fish in a long time, so I don't know where you might find those. I would say, unless somebody else maybe they've figured out, but you're probably looking at your two best bets are going to be Aquabid for something like that. Possibly the Wet Spot, just because they have such a huge inventory of, such a big selection. So those would be two places you could look. And I don't know if there's any specialty places that might have something that would, something like that. So that's a little bit more, it's a little bit harder to find. So for sure. Mary Page Flynn, thank you so much for the sticker. It's a dancing person. That's awesome. I love the dancing person. Very cool. Okay. Let's see here. We've got question time. So Tech Junkie 28. The only time TDS means anything is testing your RODI device. So, that's a good topic. So while we're on the topic of KH and pH, TDS, I have a TDS meter. I will use it from time to time. Usually it's when I know the baseline of the other things that I am I know that for the most part, my tanks are running at roughly a 10 to 12 degrees GH and KH. And so I might do a quick TDS just to see if something is drastically different. So and sometimes that can happen in some of our tanks. Like our multi-tank usually runs a little bit high, and I think that's really because we've got a combination of a lot of Texas Holy Rock in there, and the shells, the shells like the escargot shells, those things break down relatively quickly. I mean, not in the order of weeks or months, but usually after a year or two, you're starting to replace them because those things are breaking down. So that's leaching stuff into the water as well. Like I said, TDS, yeah, I would prefer, if I really want to know what's going on with my KH and my GH, just to measure that, even if it's with a test strip. If you don't want to bust out the liquid test kit, I get it. The truth is, I know it's a better thing. Right? I know for the most part, the API liquid test kit is going to be probably your most accurate result. But like a lot of people, I get lazy. I'm like, oh, there's a test strips. Go ahead and dip that in there. And then that gives me like 5 tests in one. And I don't have to mess around with all the fluids. But yeah. Thank you so much, Fred, for the super chat. Planning a 75-gallon Lake Tanganyika tank. Wanted your opinion on my stocking ideas. Maltese, Leptosoma, Lelupi, Juliochromis. I hope all can coexist peacefully in a 75. Yeah, I think so. What I would do with that, if I were going to combine those fish in a 75, I would do my best to make sure I have a lot of rock work, probably in at least half of the tank for my Juliochromis and my Lelupi. I have those together, so I have them in a 33 long. I have the Lelupi and the Juliochromis transcriptus. They're fine. The Juliochromis have like their one little rock space. The Lelupi have other parts of the rock space and just a 33. So you're talking about a 75. So I don't see any issues there. Leptosoma are going to be fine. They're all going to be towards the top and the middle part of the tank. And then your Maltese, that would be the other half-ish side of the tank. We got a lot of shells, a lot of sand. And just make sure that they can't move the shells too far into the rocky area. And you'll probably have the best luck doing that. But yeah, I think that's going to be a cool tank. I think it will be a fun tank. Definitely. All right. What else do we have here? Just scrolling through all the stuff, looking for question marks. By the way, I think one of the things that some of you do that really helps me is if you have a question and you put the @Primetime Aquatics, that kind of stands out and it highlights so that I can see things a little bit easier. Like, for instance, Noah, thank you so much. If you teach college classes the same way you teach on YouTube, I want to take that class. Well, I hope I do. I love teaching. It's one of the things where I've never called what in any respect, and I've been very blessed in this way, I never call what I do a job. I say I'm going to school. And then YouTube, I don't think that's a job either. It's me being able to share with the community the hobby that we all enjoy. So in that way, it's really been awesome. And what I miss the most right now is I've been online now. It's crazy for almost a year, and I want to get back in the classroom so bad because I enjoy being with my students. I enjoy watching them learn and kind of living their life, for 16 weeks and seeing what they're all about. It's inspiring. Students, I don't think it's said enough, but students inspire teachers, I think, as much as teachers inspire students, because they're the ones who are going through it for the first time. They've got their own life, they've got their own dreams and struggles and fears and goals, and it's really cool. It's an honor, actually, to be able to be part of that for 16 weeks. So definitely cool. Whips World. So what was it you were saying about being on time? Yeah, I don't have that compulsion. Man, that's okay. We have to have multiple types of people, because if everybody was on time all the time, you'd have traffic jams all over the place. So that's the best I can do, man. I hope it made you feel better about that. By being late, sometimes you're helping society avoid traffic jams. All right, let's see here. David, I just turned you up. Good. I hope it worked. Daniel, volume is okay. Good. Audio, video, volume. Riddle says sounds good. Okay, so that's good. I'm glad that everything is working out okay. Now, let me scroll up here and see what else we got going on. Bradley, crushed coral can help over time, but adding buffer is immediate and controllable. Yep, crushed coral is going to take a little bit of time. By the way, if you are trying to increase your pH, one of my favorite ways, like I said, is the Cichlid mix by Carib. If you want to use the aragonite, a lot, especially depending on the size tank you have, sometimes you can do that one of two ways. You can use the aragonite as a substrate. The other thing you can do is put crushed coral or aragonite in a filter bag and put that in either your canister filter or your hang-on-back filter. That is probably going to have a more immediate impact than just using it as a substrate and letting it leach out into the water that way. So that is certainly something you could consider. And even like the Cichlid salts can be good. But again, with the Cichlid salts, for the African cichlids, I've used that before because I've got some of the Fritz Cichlid salts. And for us, it doesn't have a huge impact on our water, once again, because our pH is already high, our carbonate hardness is already pretty high, but it can certainly help if your pH is closer to neutral and or your carbonate hardness is a little bit low. But what you want to do there is, again, I would practice that in a separate plastic tub and just monitor that over the course of a week, understanding, as I've said a couple times already, once you add life that's producing ammonia, that's going to nitrite, that eventually goes to nitrate, which can actually adjust the pH in a downward motion, or downward fashion, and you've got waste that's happening and building up in a substrate and all the life things going on in the other microbes. Sometimes we're so focused on the microbes that are just accomplishing the nitrification process that we forget that there are microbes that are also heterotrophs, which means that they are consuming organic material, and that is also contributing to the ecosystem of our fish tanks. And of course, you're going to get the algae in there if you've got plants. So there's a lot of things going on in there that can adjust pH. One of the other things too, and I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but it popped into my brain case, and that is plants. One of the things that we talk about from time to time, especially in my microbiology class and in my bio majors course, is, and this is especially important if you have a pond. If you have a lot, and I mean a lot of plants in your fish tank, what we don't tend to appreciate sometimes is while the lights are on, they're doing some pretty cool things, right? They're taking in the CO2 that the fish are producing. They're also expelling oxygen that the fish can utilize, so they're oxygenating the water, and it's all great. They're taking out waste products, and everything works wonderfully. But guess what happens at night? A lot of people don't realize that when the lights go out, what's happening, what the plants are doing, is now they're actually consuming sugars. The very sugars that they make through photosynthesis, they now switch and start to consume those sugars when the lights go off. And so what that means is now instead of producing oxygen, they're actually taking the oxygen out of the water. Why that's important? If you don't have a lot of surface agitation and you have a lot of plants, or let's say you have a major algae breakout, and all of that algae and all those plants start consuming the sugars that they've stored, what's going to happen over time is if you were to measure the amount of oxygen in the water, it's going to fluctuate. It's going to go up during the day. It's going to go down at night. The other reason why that matters, when plants are consuming that oxygen, guess what they're doing? Just like the fish, they're releasing CO2. Like, okay, whatever. The CO2 in an aqueous solution often gets converted to carbonic acid. Now what's happening is not only do you have fluctuations in your dissolved oxygen concentrations over a 24-hour period, you also have fluctuations in the pH. And so what tends to happen at night, that pH goes down as the carbon dioxide is converted to carbonic acid. And then when the lights come on, usually in about an hour or so, you start to see that pH start to go back up again as the carbon dioxide is being pulled back out of the water as the plants and algae are using that. And so that is something to keep in mind. So sometimes if you've got a lot of plants or an algae outbreak, it's something you want to watch for. All right. Fred, thank you so much for the super chat. Wait, did I already see this one? Yes, Fred, I did, right? Planning a 75-gallon lake tank, and you can take one of your opinion on stocking ideas, Maltese, Leptosoma. Yeah, I already answered that one. Yeah, it's going to work out great. Let me scroll on down here some more. I think, oh my gosh, my chat stuff got stuck, and now it's not making any. Oh, all right, now I see all the at Primetime Aquatics coming up here. So I asked for it, and I got it. Peter says, thank you for the super chat, by the way. I've had a buffering substrate heavily carpeted for over a year now. When it will stop buffering pH, do I have to remove the substrate, or because I have a sump, can I place containers of fresh substrate in the sump and not remove the old? Absolutely. Yeah. You're in good shape because you have a sump. One of the benefits of having a sump system is you can do things like that. You can grow plants in there. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can add substrate. You can add a big, giant filter bag full of stuff. So, Peter, you can absolutely do that. Again, thank you for the super chat. I think we can. Do you want to come in now? Joanna is going to make her way in here. You're gonna move the sign. So everybody say goodbye to Joanna the sign, and now we're gonna get Joanna the human being here. By the way, because I didn't mention it, she's going to yell at me in about 2 seconds. So I don't want her to yell at me. The background.
I just broke your whiteboard.
And she broke my whiteboard, but that's okay. We'll tape it up. That's what duct tape is for. The background is, you want to explain the background, what you did here?
Oh, okay.
I'm going to move over a little bit so we're not like seeing half people.
All right.
Say hi to everybody.
That was tough being that whiteboard. Okay. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my backdrop is called Ode to Snow. Since everybody's getting nailed with so much snow,
yep.
I figured I would do last hurrah.
Absolutely. And by the way, if you've been snowed in, and especially if you live in Texas, I know that some of you could be going through some stuff lately. So hopefully everything is okay and everybody gets through it okay. J-Man2, thank you so much for the super chat. Could regular pH crash in tanks indicate overstocking? Debating with my partner, I say yes, even after use of buffers for our soft, neutral tap water. Yeah, I think it could. So overstocking, what's happening there? It's a couple things. One, you've got fish that are producing a lot of waste products, and generally speaking, the waste products that are produced are going to lower pH. I even find that as well as our water is buffered with our relatively high KH, when I had the 150, when it was heavily stocked, I had the tinfoil barbs, the ballast shark. At one point, I had those fish in there with some peacock cichlids. I mean, it worked out fine personality-wise. They didn't pick on each other. They ignored one another. But even after a week, that tank, actually, the pH would go from right around an 8.2, and I would test it right before the water change, and it would drop to around 7.7 to 7.8. So, yeah, if you've got a lot of fish in a tank, what you may see is over the course of a week, like right when you do the water change, it goes up a little bit, and then as you especially if you're only doing a water change once a week, then you could start to see that go down right before you do the water change. So it's possible. The solution for that is to do more frequent, smaller water changes if you wanted to do that. Finn Wiggles, thank you so much for the sticker. Number one fan.
Love the stickers. And Mary Page loves your sticker too. The
Yep.
little dancing person, so cute.
Pretty awesome.
Hey, Michael. I'm getting a bunch of hellos. Hey, Eric. Eric's in the house here.
Awesome.
And bonjour. Bonjour.
Okay.
Hi, Cheryl. There was a question that I saw for very sciencey pH here. Where'd it go?
That was Joanna's task while
yeah, I know, but so
the
much
whiteboard was here.
But so much came in through here, like afterwards.
All right. Well, you look for it. I'm going to continue to
get the next one
to answer questions. Let's see here. I'm looking at Sly Cichlid. What is the best big fish for a 125 gallon with an Oscar? Best big fish. Well, in a 125 big fish, huh? Probably. So the first one that came to my mind was silver dollars. The Oscars can be, at times, they can be a little bit energetic, and at other times, not so much. Some people would say tinfoil barbs, bala sharks, but after having kept them, I would prefer that those fish be, at least for me, if I were keeping them, I would probably want them in an 8-foot tank just because of their activity level and how large they get. The silver dollars obviously don't get as long. I like them as kind of like a schooling fish in a 125. I think that could be pretty cool with an Oscar.
Okay.
All right, you got it?
I got it.
All right.
Hey, Laugh. Your last video was like crazy cool. Anyways.
Sweet.
All right, she's got a question. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hey, yeah. I asked my question about aiming for high pH last week. Do you think adding empty mystery snails in addition to crushed coral substrate, cuttlebone, and limestone would help? And I believe she's referring to a 30-gallon with 200 plus mystery snails. I hope I got that right.
So that's very similar to what we've got going on in our 20-gallon. At least probably, yeah. We've probably got at least 100. I know at times we've had a couple hundred and a 20 long. So we want a high pH, right? And we said empty mystery snails. Is that what you said? Like the shells?
Yeah.
So leave the shells. I always leave the shells in. So if some of the mystery snails don't make it, I generally leave those shells in because I want them to break down. I want those minerals back in the water. The cuttlebone will absolutely work. And again, you could consider doing something like, lately I've been adding a little bit of the African cichlid mix in there. Not a lot, but a little bit just to see how they do. They've done okay. The other thing is, if you really want to deal with that, but don't put it directly in that tank, is like a baking soda sort of thing and see how that works. But yeah,
Is this the same tank that you have crushed coral?
Crushed coral.
Because I know you've got a tank that has
aragonite is a good one too. So those are all potential options. Yeah. Okay. Trish, I have planted tanks that have 0 nitrates and tanks that struggle with nitrates and plants disintegrate. Quite a balancing act. Yeah, it's plants that, especially when you're just adding them, they can kind of drive you crazy at times, and until you find a balance. And some of them melt back, some of them start to regrow, some of them just never actually do super awesome. The one thing that's interesting is it's something that's debated in the literature, not really debated, but they've come up with some examples where plants actually kind of have a little bit of chemical warfare going on. And so it's something, I don't have the specific examples, but I remember reading in some of the literature, this was years ago, about people studying plants, not only in aquatic environments, but in terrestrial environments where they will release chemicals that make it harder for other plants to grow too. Roy, thank you so much for the super chat. Tap water here starts at a GH of 8, KH of 4, TDS of 210. But tank is currently GH 5, KH 1, and TDS of 160. Should I use something to balance this out? I guess the question is, how are your fish doing? If the fish are fine, they're swimming, they're living a long time, they're healthy, there's no signs of disease, there's no fin clamping, there's no cloudy eyes, there's no signs of bloat, bacterial infections, they eat well, I don't necessarily know if I would do much of anything as long as you've got stability. Yeah, your KH is pretty low. So the thing there, again, is you have to make sure that with that low KH, you're not getting wild fluctuations in pH. You didn't mention that, so I'm assuming that's probably not the case. It's interesting that it's changing that much. I got the other thing too is, once again, you could consider more frequent, smaller water changes if you wanted to try to keep that closer to what's going on with your tap water. Yeah, I mean, those are certainly options. What do you got?
Keep going down.
All right.
Get some more super chats.
Oh my gosh. Hold on.
Finn Wiggles. Oh, Finn Wiggles is here. Hey.
Yeah, she was the one that, or Finn Wiggles is the one that just put the thing out there, the sticker.
Really?
I just
sorry. I was transitioning more.
She was
back
transitioning.
From
Yep.
Blackboard.
Will, by the way, thank you so much, Finn Wiggles, for the
Thank
super
you.
chat. Will my teensy weensy sparkling gourami baby start to eat the Endler fry when she grows bigger? Hint, I want the answer to be no.
No.
No way.
No.
Impossible. Won't happen.
Not a baby.
The sparkling gourami will never eat any baby Endlers ever the rest of your life.
That's right, because they're the sweetest, sparklingest.
Unless, of course, they get hungry. So here's how I would reduce the likelihood of that happening. First thing I would do is I would make sure that my little Endler babies have some top cover. All right, so you've got some hornwort up there. That's one thing I would do. Or guppy grass. The second thing I would do is make sure that my sparkling gourami is not going hungry. And so for us in our fish room, we feed all of our fish twice a day. Now, I understand that there are people like, you know what, I feed my large cichlids twice a week, and it's fine. I do that because I don't have a lot of fish aggression. I mean, you guys have seen the tanks now for 4 years, and every time you see them, there's very rarely a fish that's got torn fins, is hiding up in a corner, is getting beat up. That's a very rare occurrence, and I think one of the main reasons for that, and actually this is something that you discovered just recently in the 15-gallon column tank. So we had a problem with, was it the Ember Tetras that were fin nipping a betta?
Yes.
And you switched to feeding them more often.
Yeah, I was going to, and I think we might have even taken them up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, let's try something.
Yep.
And I actually feed them 3 times a day.
Small, right?
Very small little snacks, and there's no problem at all.
Yeah. And that is the same reason why, I think it was like maybe a couple fish room tours ago, so this is now going back a couple years. In the 125, we had the Oscar back when Timmy was still around. These are big fish, right? They're over a foot. And we had some OB peacocks breeding in that tank. And we had fry everywhere. And yeah, some fry every once in a while would go missing, but for the most part, I wasn't in a hurry to pull out those OB fry because most of them would survive. And the reason for that is I fed that tank twice a day, and they got their cichlid pellets and all that stuff. And Timmy and Chaz, the Oscar and the tilapia, they're sitting up there and they're gobbling all this stuff down. They're nice and full. They really didn't feel like chasing around other fish. Now, I'm sure the ones that went missing were like, hey, what's this cave over here with eyes? And the next thing you know, of course, that one goes missing. But one of the best ways to reduce fish aggression, and especially live bear predation, make sure that they're not hungry. And the other thing that I would recommend is if you've got live baby brine shrimp, if that's something that excites you, like, I like the idea of feeding that, sparkling gouramis love that stuff, and that will certainly help reduce their desire to feed on Endler fry.
One of my sparkling gouramis really likes snails.
Is that so?
Yeah, so when I put in the snails for the pea puffers, there's one sparkling gourami that heads right over there and says, hot dog!
Yep. That's awesome.
Little side note for you there.
Okay, Tech Junkie, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. What is a good pH test kit? You would think. Let me just call a timeout here.
Oh, okay.
You would think I do this whole thing on pH and I would have said something about that, right? I'm glad you asked the question. Thank you for that, because it makes this whole thing a lot more better. So pH. There are 3 ways that I potentially measure pH. One is with the API test kit. And so if you're going to use a test kit, that's probably the most reliable. I think the biggest problem people have with the API test kit is that when they're trying to match up the tube and the color with the card. I have always found if you look straight down the tube as opposed to the side of the tube, you're going to get a truer idea of what the color actually is. You have the test strips, and so I actually did a video where I compared the API and the Tetra test strips. I prefer the Tetra brand over the API just for the test strips. However, that being said, if I'm testing pH, a lot of times I have an actual pH meter that I use. So if you were to go into the video that I have in the description below where I've got one about pH, in the description, I think I listed all of the ways in which you can test pH, and I listed the pH meter that I use. it's been extremely reliable. So when I test the pH using my pH meter, and by the way, I don't think it was that expensive. It might have been like $20. So in the long run, if you're someone who's like, you know what, I'd like to test my pH like once a month, well, you're going to buy those test strips, and after a year or so, you'll have spent that money anyway, and you could just get the pH meter, and it's quick, and it's reusable. And I found, at least the brand that I have is very reliable. So I use a pH meter most of the time when I'm testing my pH. But thank you for asking that question, because I neglected to mention that, and that was a bad me. I'm a bad live stream person today. All right, I see another super chat. Thank you so much, Ian. How do I know if my new tank baby tears are dying or transitioning melting? I have high light and CO2 plus liquid ferts, 5-day-old tank. What should I do? Okay, so two things. One, when was the last time we had baby tears in the fish room? It's been a while. So I am not necessarily an expert here. Usually it's time, right? With a lot of plants, at least in my experience, first of all, you've got the right things going on, right? So you've got high light, you've got the CO2, you're using the liquid fertilizer. So those are all things that you want to do. So you're most likely doing everything you can do. And so now it's just a matter of letting the plants do what they do. And so how do you know if they're, I mean, it sounds bad, but how do you know if they're dying or just transitioning and melting back? Well, if they're dying, they're not coming back, right? If they're melting, they will make a recovery, so to speak. So if anyone's a baby tier expert and wants to add a little bit more to that, certainly I'm sure Ian would be very appreciative of that. Let's see here. What else do we got? Scrolling on down. Hold on. So I missed here's some more at Primetime Aquatics. By the way, everyone, if you're asking questions, thank you so much for putting all the at Primetime Aquatics in there. It just makes the questions a lot easier to find. Alphabet Grow. Do you have any hints on calibrating the pH meters? I think that's one of the biggest issues with the cheaper ones, distilled water, etc. The one that I have, that I link in the pH video, the calibration is really easy because there's actually two different solutions. And so you just open the bottle of the solution and you stick the pH meter in there, and it gives you the directions like hold this button down for calibration for low pH. You hold it down and then it calibrates. Oh, here's 4.0. And then you rinse it out. You do the same thing for the high pH. It just says, it gives you the directions to hit the calibration button, put it in the high pH solution, and then it does it. But I've also found once I do that, I don't really have to do that again for like a year or two. So that's how mine works. I don't know, if yours is different or not. Let's see here. Bible Word Press. Have a good night, Professor. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful evening. Michael asks, what are the top bacteria and fungus meds for cories and plants? Top bacteria and fungus meds for cories and plants. I would say, for me, again, we're sponsored by Fritz, so that's what I use, and I know that the stuff works, right? And so again, when we take on sponsors, we want to make sure that the stuff that they sell is stuff that works. And so whether you're using the Furan or the what is it? I never can remember the other one, really, because we don't get a lot of bacterial and fungal infections. The erythromycin probably is going to work okay too for bacteria, but I usually, if there's a problem, I generally just go on their website, say, okay, what do I need? And then the Furan 1 and 2, I think, are pretty good from the few times I've had to use them. Let's see here. Kevin asks, have you ever used dry start method and thoughts? I have not used it. And it's something I might do, but we generally just try to keep it simple in our fish room, and what we do works, and so I haven't really done anything else. Dr. J Dog, do I have to use aquarium rocks for my fish tank, or can I use landscaping rocks? So, good question. We pretty much, unless it's the Seiryu stone, almost always use river rocks that come from a landscaping place. So haven't had any issues with them. Generally speaking, I will take, if I want to wash them off, I'll just take a hose and a wire brush, You can, if you wanted to be a little bit more thorough, you could certainly use, like some people will pour, don't boil the rocks directly, but some people have poured boiling water over them. I generally don't do that. If I'm really concerned, I might put them in a 10% bleach solution. In fact, I think we did a video on where to find cheap rocks and how I deal with that. But for the most part, we just use landscaping rocks because at this point, I'm not paying $4 a pound for rocks. I refuse to do that unless it is I refuse to do it.
Yeah.
You'll do it if...
I do it, but I have smaller tanks, so it's a lot more feasible that way.
Smaller tanks, and it's rocks that you can't find at a landscaping place, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
something specialized and you want them all to kind of match. But I'm not paying $4 a pound. That's insane. Not when I can go to a landscaping place and pay 29 or 39 cents a pound, right? And I could fill up the back of my truck and be like, oh yeah, I just got 300 pounds of rock. And had I gone to a pet store, this would have cost me like $1,000 or something. I'm not doing that. So yeah, landscaping place, I just generally stick with the river rock. And then for us, the flagstone works well in our cichlid tanks.
Brianna wants to know, what's wrong with boiling rocks?
Boiling rocks, depending on the rock, they can explode.
Yep.
And so the best example I can give you, and so some people are like, oh, that doesn't happen. Yes, it does. Good example. It wasn't necessarily boiling, but we went on vacation this summer, and there was a fire pit in the back of this cabin, and somebody had lined the fire pit with rock, which, okay, whatever. Well, after about 15 minutes, after the, I didn't realize what was around the fire pit, and so we're hearing like cracking. So you know how you hear like the fire goes, then it kind of cracks. I'm like, okay, that must have been like air in the wood or something like that. But then it started happening more, and I'm like, that's odd. And then all of a sudden something flew by my face after something cracked, and it hit the back of the cabin. So now things are like cracking and like flying everywhere. It was the rock. The rock was warming up. It was getting hot, and it was exploding. That rock that whoever used it was the people who used that cabin before us. They built that fire pit out of rock that was not conducive to fire. No. The same thing can happen potentially if you're boiling, especially rock that is a little bit lighter, a little bit flakier. So that's why boiling rock is probably not the best idea.
All right, Daniel wants to know, do you like better... You can answer and then I'll answer.
Okay.
Do you like better Cerio stone or Dragonstone?
I don't know if I have a preference. I like them both. I don't have a preference. Partially because I don't aquascape anything, and so generally I'm like, even with the last couple tanks, like, hey, can we redo the 20-gallon long down there like we did the guppy tank, and then I walk away, and we have found it's always much better for me just to leave because I think I want something a certain way, and then I mess with your vision of whatever you want.
Sometimes, yeah.
And I become the annoying person.
Yeah.
You wind up telling me to leave anyway. So I have found it's just best to say, hey, can we do something with that 20? I empty it out. I clean it out. You do your thing. So I don't know. What do you have a preference?
Usually you'll just give me a direction, though. Like I was thinking of... the Caribsea sand, or I really want a black or,
color.
Yeah, and then we look to see what we have. Like a lot of times with the Dragonstone, I sometimes would say that I prefer the Dragonstone. I really love it. However, you've heard there's fake Dragonstone. Whatever you want to say about it, there's a type that's very, very crumbly. Makes a mess, and you can't really clean it because it just keeps crumbling and crumbling and crumbling. Unfortunately, a lot of our stuff right now is, especially what I can get to, we have it stacked really high. I can't get to all of it. But yeah, a lot of that is that crumbly stuff. But yeah, they're both really cool depending the scape that you want to use. But yeah.
Yeah, part of our garage, I built shelves on part of our garage. It looks like a pet store. I mean, literally, it's got... Yeah. We've got fish tanks, empty ones that are just kind of stacked up. I don't know. We're becoming hoarders when it comes to fish tanks.
You need to redo it. I've got plans.
Yeah, we've got 20s up there and 10 gallons and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
All kinds of rocks and driftwood. So, yeah. Gus asks, where did you get your Pseudotrophia celosi? I got those from a Greater Chicago Cichlid Association meeting a number of years ago. In fact, those were some really early ads to the... I'm pretty sure within the first few months of setting up that side of the fish room, where the Maltese are, those fish wound up in a 40-gallon breeder. So that colony is at least, I don't even know, 4 years old, maybe a little bit older. And they've bred a lot for us. But yeah, I got those at one of our local fish club meetings. But they are, you can usually find those in Aquabid. You can certainly find them at the wet spot. They're pretty common. I'm sure there are other places where people could recommend, just who deal mostly with cichlids, that they could certainly point in the right direction. Thing Tran says, Professor Jason, thank you for the nitrogen cycle video, and your beard is awesome. Thank you so much. I'm glad you liked the video, and my beard also says thank you. It's a little bit unruly today. I don't know what happened.
The weather?
It must be people get like bad hair days. I get bad beard days if it's, I don't know, if there's something going on with the humidity or something.
Hey, we have a hey from Tony. Hey, Tony.
Hey, Tony.
It's from, he's from Montreal.
Oh, cool.
I miss Portillo's restaurant.
You know, it's funny, and people from like the Chicagoland area, it is without fail it is the number one place. So if you've been to Chicagoland and you've seen a Portillo's, you know that is just some food. Like all my buddies and stuff who have since moved away and like they live in different states, they get like off the plane, they're like, take me to Portillo's. Portillo's has got like the best
everything,
like hot dogs and burgers and beef sandwiches. It's
beef.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. So I understand you miss it. Marty, thank you so much for the super chat.
Hey,
Appreciate it.
Marty,
Thank you so much for being here. Let's see here. The Irishman, my betta dolly contracted velvet. I started her on a treatment. Out of all the ways to save your betta, what would you do? What would I do? I'm hesitating because I think what I would do, I'm not sure I necessarily recommend, and that is I probably go the copper safe route. The problem with copper safe is if you have plants, if you have any invertebrates, they've got to be removed. Copper safe is tough on the aquarium cycle, but we just had an issue in one of our tanks where, especially the members are aware of this, where we had some fish that got ick, and I thought we had it contained to that tank, and it spread to another tank, and fish were dying, and in order to save them, I knew that like the malachite green and the formalin wasn't going to stop it early enough, and I knew that yes, the copper safe is going to be, it's harsh. It's certainly more harsh than a lot of meds, but it kind of stopped it in its tracks. But I also am aware that the copper safe probably made it impossible for some of the fish that were a little bit on the edge. It made it impossible for them to survive. But the fish that were kind of hanging on, it did a lot. In this case it was ick, but that copper safe also treat velvet. So it's something you can look at. But if you think that it's like the fish is barely hanging on, or you've got invertebrates or plants, it's a harsh med. It is. All right, let's see here. What else do we have?
Kelly says, this is my favorite live stream. You two rock.
Thank you so much.
Cute. But you spell favorite. The point that I'm reading this is you spell favorite with a U. So I'm just curious where you're from.
Cool.
Okay.
I'm
just throwing that out there.
All right. Wait, hold on a second.
What?
Tonoki 3000. Portillo's came to Minnesota recently.
What?
Next time I go to Minnesota, I'm going to have to stop in there and see if it tastes the same as like the Chicagoland area Portillo's, because, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
Daniel says, can I suggest a vid for the small scape? Can you guys do what is this?
Iwagami.
Iwagami aquascape.
It's Iwagumi, I'm sure, but I always in my head say
okay.
Iwagumi,
she can do it. She's going to do it. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is. So I'm not an aquascape person. So
you should see us sometimes talking video ideas, because I can talk his video ideas all the time, and then I bring up mine, and he's like, I don't know what you're saying.
It's just a blank look. I'm like, shoot it, and then let me know what you want when I edit it.
Wabikusa, Awagumi, and he's like, I don't know what you're saying. But yeah, there's a lot of escapes coming that you haven't seen, because it takes a lot more stuff. So, but yeah, you bet.
All right, hold on now here. Wolfman asks, how long will freshly hatched baby brine shrimp last, safe to feed? Will refrigeration extend that time? Store in sealed container or open to air necessary? So the quick answer is I don't know, because when I hatch live baby brine, I feed it out right away. Usually what I do is I let it go for 20, I put the eggs in and I let them do their thing for 24 hours with air. And after 24 hours, I feed it all out. So yes, it will last longer in a refrigerator. It will slow down their metabolism. I don't know how long that will be. So if somebody has done that, if you can respond to Wolfman like, hey, yeah, they were still alive and kicking after 24 hours or 48 hours, I suspect you're going to get a couple days out of it, but I don't know for sure. Like, I don't know the details of, okay, well, after 24 hours in the fridge, they're going to slow down. And after 48, they're completely dead. But I suspect at least a day or two. In terms of whether or not it needs to be sealed or opened, I would think I don't know, because usually they hatch a little bit better with light. And so I don't know if, either way, in the fridge is going to be dark, but I'm not sure. I really don't know. All right. Oh my gosh. Okay. So a whole bunch of stuff just popped up here. Al, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Missed the water chemistry class. If I watched the replay, do I still get credit?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm going to have to dock you 10%. I mean, that's the late fee. That's just kind of how I roll. If you're late, 10%. Next time, got to be on time. But for you, we'll skip the 10% just this time. Gerald, thank you so much for the super chat. I have a few fish, Africans, that have sunken stomach. Treating fish with metronidazole flakes, how long to treat? So if they're eating, that's a good sign. How long to treat? I would say what you're looking for there is if the sunken belly is an internal parasite, you really want their waste, their fecal matter, to start looking normal again. And so that's kind of what I would do. But if they're eating, that's a good sign, because often what happens is when they get those sunken bellies, once they stop eating, it's like, yeah, you can douse that tank full of metronidazole powder or general cure. It's probably not going to work at that point. So it's unfortunate, but it's kind of what happens. Okay, what else we have here? You got something?
No, you already, no.
Oh, here's a good question. Wacky Fiasco. How to raise carbonate hardness without raising pH? That's a popular issue, and when the general hardness is high already from the tap, but the KH is not nearly as high. Yeah, so general hardness and carbonate hardness are two different things. That's something we talk about in the water hardness video. It's not, I don't think there's a good way to do that. I don't think there's a good way to raise carbonate hardness without having some impact on pH, because usually the alkalinity, which is your carbonate hardness, is going to track well with the pH. So I'm not so sure, because once you get that carbonate hardness, then what you're doing is you're fighting it, right? So, and this is not something I really talked about in detail, but that buffer, right, is there to make sure that your pH doesn't change much, and that's what you're doing with your carbonate hardness. When you try to lower pH, and this is something I didn't really mention early on, but when you try to lower that pH when your water has a high KH, what often happens is people will like, okay, I'm doing something to lower. So for instance, maybe I'm adding a little bit of RO or a little bit more RO. In fact, rainwater would have the same impact. A lot of times rainwater has a lower pH, and obviously it's got no KH or GH. I'm adding. And it's like that buffer is resisting. But what happens with a buffer often is the buffer is like it's holding up this heavy load, right? And that is pH stable. And then at some point you overcome the buffer. When you add a little bit more of whatever you're adding, everything comes crashing down. So once you overcome that buffer. So sometimes you have not much happening, and then wham, a major change. And that's what you have to be careful of. Let's see here. B101. What size tank would you recommend for a black ghost knife? Black ghost knife. I want to see something. Well,
yeah, how big do they get?
So the black ghost knife, I think, is just. I'm typing it in my computer here because I kept a ghost knife when I was like really young. So the black ghost knife, I don't think it's nearly as big, right? So it's not like the other knife fish that's like super huge, but it's been a while since like I said, I had one. So 20 inches. Yeah. So it does get a little bit bigger, but not as big as like the other ones. A 20-inch black ghost knife. I think if I were keeping that, I would want that in a tank that is at least 2 feet wide, right? So long tank, it maybe like a 180, 210, 220, somewhere in there as a minimum. Just because a 20-inch fish, I mean, that thing's got to turn around. So you need at least 24 inches wide, right? And then you're going to want something at least minimum 6 feet long, minimum. So that's my thought on the matter. Let's see here. We're going to scroll around here in the chat. Thank you so much, Penny, for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Any advice for people in Texas without power? Yes. Thanks for asking that question, by the way. First of all, I'm sorry that you're going through that. I know it's been an absolute mess, and I'm really sorry that's happening. So the short answer is I did a video on what to do in case of an emergency. The problem is I did that video last year, right around the time we were having the situation happen. And I used a word that the video publisher didn't like. And so that video got heavily suppressed. And I was like, I just put out this video. It's getting like no views. And I used a word that is not well, no, that is not well liked by the people on social media who run the social media. So I do have a video there, but to answer your question, without power, and I don't even know how long, right? So how long are we talking? And it depends. Like, so you don't have power, and I don't know, do you have like gas heat? So can you keep the house warm? The big thing is, and depending on the fish that you have, you want to try to keep some surface agitation going. So that might mean, like, if it were me and like the power went down, my number one concern is, how do I keep my bacteria alive? I want to keep them alive. So a battery powered air pump, some way that I can do surface agitation just to keep the oxygen concentrations going. Because it's not just for the fish at this point, it's also for the beneficial bacteria that are on the surfaces of your tank. Assuming that your tank is somewhat well established, I think that would be a number one thing. Obviously now we're also dealing with the temperatures. When caught early enough, there is like insulation, like the almost like that reflective blanket type stuff that you can put over the tank that will kind of trap the heat. It's really important right now to try to keep your tank covered so that whatever heat, water takes on a lot of heat, right? It can take on a lot of energy. And if you can cover that tank, it will release it a little bit slower. But even, if you've got no power running in there, putting blankets over it just to try to keep that temperature from sinking, too low, too fast. Yeah, it's a tough situation, because if you're out for weeks, or not weeks, but many days, multiple days, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, the other thing that I would do is definitely consider reducing your feeding. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, if the temperature is dropping, most likely the fish in the tank, their metabolism is also being reduced at that point. So they're probably not going to want to eat as much anyway. Also, that's going to reduce the bioload. So if you are losing beneficial bacteria, if you can at least keep some surface agitation going between the reduced feeding, and I mean, like, I would probably stop feeding them. And if you've got fish, like goldfish is a different story. You still kind of have to feed them. But if you've got standard tropical fish, you can go a couple days and not feed them in most cases, as long as they're healthy, and still probably be okay. But your big issues right now are keeping water moving, and try not to let that temperature go down too much. But I do have that video. It's a lot more extensive. I hope it will help. I'm sorry that you're going through that, because I know it's got to be really stressful. Okay. I'm still moving down. The thing is, the stupid chat is stuck again.
Oh, jeez.
I know. So what's going to happen is, as soon as it catches up,
zoom.
It's going to like release like 4,000 messages. Okay. Truth Will Out, thank you so much for the super chat. Portillo's is great. Almost as good as Dr. Dog, just like bears are great, almost as good as Packers. I actually went there. My sister-in-law took me to Dr. Dog. There's one right outside north of Milwaukee. Yeah. So I am aware of that place. I was in one of those right off the highway. So yeah, it was good. It was good. My personal preference is Portillo's, but
They both have really good fries too. Yeah. Totally different, but really good.
Sometimes we'll go and see the Milwaukee Brewers and they've got like really good brats and stuff. So yeah, they definitely hold their own when it comes to crazy processed meat products. So, Dr. J Dog, how big of a tank do I need to have a green Texas cichlid with Jack Dempsey cichlid? Well, one, I would get them when they're young. Two, full grown so they don't wind up messing with each other. I'd probably like a 6-foot tank. I mean, size wise, are they going to both fit into a 75? Yeah. Are they both going to fit in there without harming one another is the bigger question. So I would be most comfortable. For me personally, I wouldn't try to add them to a 75, but some people have done it. I probably wouldn't. I'd probably want to go 6 foot. Let's see here. M&C Aquatics. I have multis breeding in a 29-gallon, 3 tiny ones. I noticed today the feeding baby brine really helped. Thanks. That's awesome. So congratulations. That's really cool. It's always exciting. Like I said last week, breeding fish is just cool no matter what. And multis are especially fun when you see the little tiny babies and they get a little bit of courage. They peek out of their shells. They might swim around a little bit and they lose their little bit of courage. They go right back in, especially when you walk by the tank with the live baby brine. Especially for breeding shell dwellers, is you're going to get a lot more fry survival with that for sure.
Here I've got one for you.
Okay.
TJ Yang, I want a new challenge in fish keeping. Give me the most creative 10-gallon ideas.
Oh my gosh, that's a really great question. So a challenging 10-gallon idea.
Yeah, a creative 10-gallon idea.
Well, if it's something different, and I don't know if you've done this before, you could try breeding killifish. That can be interesting. I haven't done it. I've thought about it, and then I get lazy and I don't feel like doing it. But that might be something. What else in a 10-gallon? Caridina shrimp might be cool. So not the Neocaridina, the Caridina shrimp. The reason why that's going to be challenging is their water parameters are a little bit more complicated than the Neocaridina for most people, but absolutely, like, oh my gosh, the Caridina shrimp, the colors, they're kind of like, in my opinion, you've got the Neocaridina, which is like your cherry shrimp, your blue dreams, your yellows, your pumpkin shrimp, all cool. Love them, have them all. But then the Caridina are like the saltwater, freshwater shrimp of the shrimp world. Yeah, so you get some really awesome colors. So that might be something you could try in a 10-gallon. What else? What else in a 10-gallon tank could you do? I don't know. I'd probably start there. Something else will pop into my brain later. That's a good one. I like that question. Made me think. Hurt my brain. Thanks for that. All right, Kyle. I have a battery pack up like you use for a computer. It will run a heater and filter for a while. Yeah, that's cool. A lot of times now, especially, I think when I did, oops, sorry, I almost knocked your phone out of your hand. When I did that video on, how to prepare for a fish tank emergency, I want to say one of the air pumps that I recommended actually had a USB, which is pretty cool. So, or at least they had a USB, the ability to charge via USB. So that could be helpful, especially if you've got, oh, you know what, I could take this pump and maybe plug it into my USB in my car and drive around for a while and get it all charged up again, especially if you don't have power in your house. So, yeah. Let's see here. What else? Rob Berry at Prime Time. I'm running an FX6 and wanted to add another external filter as a pre-filter. I'm after one with good flow but skinny-ish as room is tight in my cabinet. Any suggestions? So there's two things you could do. It depends on what you want to look at. You could certainly run a hang-on back filter, right? The skinniest one that I'm aware of is probably like your Marineland Pro series. Those things tend to be very skinny. Even like the 375, I think it's like the Penguin Pro 375, not the 350, but the 375. That's the one with the internal pump. I want to say, don't quote me on this right now. I think I actually measured it in the video, but it might only be like 4.5 inches between the back, like hanging off the back of the tank. If space is really tight, and you don't mind looking at something in the tank, then you can go internal canister filter. Like, there's a million different types, right? You got the Penplex, you've got the Marineland canister, internal canister filters, tons of water flow, good for polishing water. But then you got to look at that thing inside the tank. So depends on what you want to do. But those are two ideas. All right, let's see here. Kyle says Aquarium Co-op makes a nano pump that you can use with a sponge filter. It is USB and will run off a phone battery charger pack. Yeah. Yep. So that would be a good option as well, for sure. Kevin says at Primetime Aquatics, where would you get killifish and suggestion types for a community tank or smaller tank? So where do you get killifish? I think your best bet is probably just to go to Aquabid, because killifish breeders are a very committed group. And what's really cool about killifish is you can just get the eggs. So they don't have to ship you. And most times they don't ship you fish. They will ship you the eggs, and then you hatch those out and then grow them. Now, again, the challenge there is some of the killifish are annual, or maybe they live for 2 years, and then you've got to get those things breeding. Otherwise, you're going to run out of fish. So Aquabid, I think, is probably the best place to go, because they'll just ship you the eggs, and that can be relatively cheap compared to buying fish, because the shipping is not nearly as complicated. Types for a community tank or smaller tank. I'm not a killifish expert, so I don't know necessarily the best ones for that, like which ones I would try, but it's still worth looking into. Let's see here. Jesse, plant question. Hey guys, I have Val Gigantea that is in my 150 gallon. It is now 9 feet long and starting to curl over everything on the top of the tank. Recommendations on how to trim. So when it comes to trimming, Val, the most common advice, and I don't disagree with it, is usually you take something very sharp like scissors, because if you're just tearing it or something, it has a higher likelihood of dying back. And a lot of people say to not only cut it with a pair of sharp scissors, but cut it on a slight angle. And for whatever reason, the valve does better that way. But full disclosure, I very rarely trim the valve that we have. I just kind of let it grow on the surface.
Yeah, he likes it like that.
I do. And it's partially it's just because I'm lazy, and partially it's because I just like the wildness of it all.
You kind of do, yeah.
Yep. So it's a win-win for me.
Oh, here. Alphabet Grow. Have you ever heard of using vitamin C, ascorbic acid, to bind minerals, then decant off slightly softer water? I think I'm going to test it.
I've heard it. I haven't done it, and I haven't really read enough to know if it's something that would make sense. So if you test it and it works, would love to hear if how it works for you. So let's see here. What else we got?
Oh, you know what? Penny's wondering, because there are so many USB-driven things, like a USB water pump and just all sorts of things. She wonders if there's a thing as a USB heater. You think they have a heater that you can run by USB?
That's a good. If it is, it would be for a very, very, very small tank, most likely, because heaters draw a fair amount of current. I mean, because they've got to, because of the, their job. So I'm not sure. I've never seen one, so I don't know if there is one or not. I have no idea. But if there is, it would be very small, because I don't think it would be able to run very long if it was, just because, like I said, it would take a long time to charge, because it's energy intensive. Let's see here. Damien asks, so is it a bad idea to put an angelfish in a 20 gallon? It's not something that I would do. Just because angelfish, I think sometimes when we see angelfish at a pet store, we see them as like the nickel size, and they're so cute, and they're just a little crazy. They act like little fish babies, right? When an angelfish, if you have an angelfish for 5, 6, 8, 10 years, the bodies on angelfish can be like the size of your hand at least, right? Just the bodies alone. And then you've got the fins. And I always use the example of the veil tail that we had in our 150. From the top fin to the bottom, it's at least 12 inches, right? It was a very tall fish. So when you think about that, like if I were to put that fish in a 20 gallon, it would have stretched from the top of the water to the bottom. The body would have probably swam like 5-10 body lengths, and be like, oh, hit the other side of the tank. Somehow I've got to turn around and come back. It would have looked kind of silly. So that's why when I did the angelfish care video, I recommended a minimum of a 40-gallon breeder. And so like we did the 40-gallon breeder. I've got 3 of them in there right now, but I don't think that that's going to be a long-term thing. I think they actually came out of the 125. When we redo the 125, there's a very good chance those 3 wind up back in the 125, because even in my 40-gallon breeder, if you go back and watch the 40-gallon, actually I think it was on your channel, the small scape, where that wound up, right? That scape, did it wind up there? I think it did. So if you were to look at that and see the 3 angelfish in there, then they're not big. They're not anywhere close to full grown. They're maybe
small.
like that big. But when you look at them in that 40-gallon breeder, you're like, yeah, it's okay for right now, but probably not long term. The fish nerd, Carlos, is here.
Oh,
Thanks
hey,
for being
Carlos.
here, man. Hope everybody's doing
Danny.
well. Yep. Hope the family's doing well. See the pictures sometimes on Instagram. Feel like I'm just keeping up with you guys through social media. I guess that's the point of social media.
Yeah. That was really deep.
I know. That's my wisdom for the day. Forget all the other stuff I said. We'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll probably let y'all get on with your evening.
Here's one from Edgar.
Yeah.
All right. What tank mates can I put with an Oscar?
What size tank?
What size tank?
So we did the Oscar video, and in that video I come up with a bunch of tank mates, but let's just assume that you've got a tank that's going to be large enough for an Oscar to live comfortably. And so for me, that's a 6-foot tank, right? So a 125 or greater. In that case, if you're dealing with one Oscar, maybe it's like, okay, I mentioned silver dollars before. You got to be a little bit careful, but like we have no problem doing like the full size bristlenose plecos for our cleanup. Something else that could work depending on your water parameters is like some of the Synodontis catfish, I think work out okay. You want something a little bit on the larger side, a little bit, I'm trying to think of what else. I don't know why I'm blanking. I mean, you could do some of the smaller cichlids too, like the firemouth cichlids. I'm trying to find things that I know aren't going to necessarily be combative towards one another. Like, yeah, you could do Oscars, like people do Oscars and sometimes Jack Dempsey's, and Oscars and Texas cichlids, and Oscars and some of these more aggressive medium to large size, but then problems arise later on. So Oscars and maybe some of the Geophagus might work out well. Like we had our Oscars with Geophagus steindachnerai. That worked out fine. I'm fairly certain like a lot of like the Weinmilleri, Altafrons, Cernamensis would probably work out okay. Pretty much most of the Geophagus, Severums would be another one that might work out pretty decently as well. So those would be the ones I would feel safe combining with my Oscar. Let's see here. What else do we have? Oh, Filigree Aquatics. Top 5 plecos you want to keep and basement space heaters. So basement space heater, I don't remember the brand anymore, but I did a video on how to heat a fish room, or I think it was something like that, where I definitely have a brand in there. The brand, the exact one that I use, they updated it, and so I have a link in there for that one. So top 5 plecos. What's funny is I did a members only video last week, and I was talking about plecos because I have the Blue Phantom plecos. I got 3 of those, and now they're kind of distributed throughout the, all the tanks. I never see them. I almost never see those fish. I'm hoping as they get older, maybe I'll see them a little bit more, but I doubt it. So when it comes to plecos, I really am about ones that I can mostly see. For me, the various types of bristlenose seem to be a little bit more outgoing. I see them a little bit more. So we've got all kinds of, we've got the blue-eyed, they call them blue-eye longfin albinos, but they're just blue-eye albino color. I have the longfin green dragons. I have longfin calicos. I have the standard browns, the standard albinos, super reds, in the case I don't know if I mentioned that. I like those because I tend to see them out and about. A clown plecos I like, but they're again a little bit more shy. But I don't know if I can bring as cool as they look, I don't know if I could bring myself to spend a lot of money on plecos. I might not see a lot. So that's why I don't have a bunch of them. Okay. Let's see here already. Gus, I don't know if you answered this already, but so I had 2 mollies in my 35 gallon at the time. They were Dalmatian. I gave a bunch away, but the ones I kept turned into black and gold ones. How? Well, that depends on their lineage, right? So probably at some point they were hybridized and they were showing Dalmatian. And I don't know the exact genetics, so I don't know how that's working in terms of how they're showing their, what we'd call their phenotype, their physical characteristics based on their genotype, their genetic code. So, but at some point there was probably some black and gold in them. Well, certainly black, because I mean the Dalmatian, but the gold, yeah, it must have been mixed in there somewhere, and that was just being expressed. But kind of cool. Maybe separate them out and see if you can line breed them.
Surprise, surprise.
Yep. Dr. J Dog, are dwarf Grammys good tank mates for green Texas cichlids? I probably wouldn't do that, only because green Texas cichlids get pretty ornery and aggressive, and the dwarf Grammys stay fairly small. There's a chance they might ignore one another, but there's also a chance that the green Texas cichlid decides this is my tank and really easily destroys that dwarf Grammy quicker than you can do something about it. That right? So that's usually when you've got two larger fish. If something bad happens, like let's say, I mixed an Oscar and a green Texas cichlid and they were fine for months, but then there was a problem. That problem often starts to unfold over the course of, like, you notice it one day, like, that's weird. Now they're locking lips. Probably got to do something about that. Oh, like a day later, it's like, that stinks. It looks like one fish won that battle. Now the other one's up in a corner. And there's some, a little bit of tear in the fins, but I can still remove it and be okay. Where with a, Texas cichlid and dwarf Grammy, it's like, oh, that fish lost and now it's gone, right? So that's probably why I wouldn't do it. Regina, thank you so much for the super chat. Appreciate it. Hold on, now it went away, so I was going to read it. There you go. Thank you for the education and entertainment. Well, thank you for being here. Glad that you're here. Finn Wiggles, thank you so much for a little sticker with the. Is that dropping the mic? That's pretty
really?
Cool. I think it is.
Aww,
So dropping the mic.
Aww.
All right, everyone. I think what we are going to do is we're going to wrap it up and let everybody kind of go to bed and have a wonderful evening, especially for those of you who are kind of hanging out from across the pond, as they say. That's right. Yeah, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning here. Hardcore, awesome fish people. That's what you are. But thank you so much. And again, thank you so much to our wonderful moderators, Myrtle and Mary and Clint and everybody else who's here, and all the great questions and the super chats. Thank you. Really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the whiteboard at the beginning, we can certainly do more of that. You can always leave like, yeah, I like that. Leave that stuff in the comments section. If you hated it, leave that too, because I don't want to do stuff that we don't want to see. So we will see you next week, and have a wonderful weekend.